Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chai Talk for the Left Hook Substack, where I invite a subject matter expert who's usually far, far smarter than me to tackle one big or several questions in 30 minutes or less. And today, I'm joined by Eric Blanc. He is an associate professor of labor studies at Rutgers University and author of several books, the latest being We Are the Union: How Worker to Worker Organizing is Revitalizing Labor and Winning Big. It drops in February. What date specifically, Eric?
February 18th.
February 18th. All right. So pre-order it now, uh, preferably from an independent bookstore. I think Eric would appreciate that as well. And I've invited Eric to break down how American workers can take on and defeat the Broligarchy. Eric has done the work. He's done the research. It's not all doom and gloom, folks. The book actually provides a pathway for not just resistance, but also victory. And you mentioned something first and foremost, Eric, about worker to worker organizing, right? What does that actually mean, work to work organizing as a means of achieving this victory for labor? Break it down and define it for the rest of us.
Okay, I'll do that. But first, I want to touch on your initial point, which is that workplace organizing is central to defeating the Broligarchy.
Mm,
It's just has to be the starting point because otherwise, who cares? Honestly, like why worker to worker organizing is important because the starting point has to be the question of power. How do we build the power necessary to overcome the billionaires that are running this country and the world essentially into disaster, right? That's the starting point. And working class people have that power both because we're the majority, but then also because we have leverage at work. When we withhold our labor, we can shut down any private company, we can shut down any public institution. And so the combination of these factors makes workplace organizing just tremendously important, potentially for the power we can build, and then immediately for the struggles against Trump, against Amazon, Starbucks. So that's a general case for workplace organizing. But then the particular question is, well, how do we win and how do we win at scale? Because labor movement for decades now has known how to win small scale strikes, small scale union drives. There's a lot of very like time tested tactics for how to use staff to support workers to win at small fights. The harder question is how do you organize millions and millions of workers? Because this is really ultimately what it's going to take to turn around economic inequality, to defeat Trump, all of this. And so the book makes a case for worker to worker unionism. Worker to worker unionism is essentially a type of unionism that depends far less than traditional unionism on staff and far more on worker leadership. So the types of things that most of the time in union drives, staff paid full-timers do, workers take on. And the upshot of this is that the movement is able to spread far more widely because it's far less expensive and it's far more sort of viral than when you have to pay a full-time staffer. So these are things like workers training other workers in how to organize rather than having a paid full staff time
mm.
person training other workers. So in Starbucks, for instance, your listeners might remember that in November 2021, workers in upstate New York won one union election. And then all of a sudden, people all across the country were excited. Baristas all across the country were excited. And they wouldn't have been able to spread the movement nationally had they done the traditional approach of having a full-time staffer coaching every new drive. They just literally didn't have the staff necessary to do that. So instead, what they did is they had workers from these stores over Zoom reaching out and training all of these other workers across the country and how to organize their shop. And it was through that way that the Starbucks movement went viral. So that's one piece of it is workers training workers. And then the other piece is workers starting to organize without at first having support from an institutional union. So you have to find ways through mass trainings and through education and through social media to encourage and inspire workers and give them tools to start self-organizing. And then eventually most of them end up connecting with a union. But here, again, a good example would be the Amazon Labor Union, which
Right.
was begun and won in Staten Island by workers with no institutional support. And they did what nobody thought was possible, which is they defeated and won a union election against the biggest corporation in the world, Amazon. Now they're affiliated with the Teamsters. And I think it's important to connect this kind of bottom-up energy with
Eh,
institutional support. But ultimately, it was the workers who took the initiative.
I want to focus on an Amazon story because I find it very inspiring, and you have the details. But from memory, I remember it was like two young black men who were workers who were underestimated by Amazon. People, the Amazon leadership was like, whatever. No one's gonna listen to these guys. and they're the ones who did this worker to worker organizing. They reached out to their fellow workers. They're the ones who were purely grassroots. And these two young men, whose names I'm forgetting at this moment, were the ones who were responsible for essentially galvanizing this massive victory that Amazon leadership did not see coming.
Right, that's exactly right. Yeah, so you're thinking about Chris Smalls and Derek Palmer, right? Exactly as you mentioned. Yeah, two young black working class dudes who are working at the warehouse. The pandemic hits, and management at that warehouse, like in the rest of the company and in like most of corporate America, did not care about whether workers lived or died. And these workers took the initiative to organize a walkout. Chris Smalls got fired for organizing this walkout, went a little viral online, and then all of a sudden they had a movement, right? But it took a long time. It took a lot of organizing for them to win. It didn't just sort of happen automatically. To win, even when you're doing this bottom-up organizing, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of risk and, courage. And it was remarkable what they were able to do. And it's inspiring now that it's spreading across to Amazon's companies, to Amazon workplaces all across the country.
And can you mention that on Amazon? I think last check it was to 7 sites for the first time ever, right? That it spread as of I believe last month.
Yeah, I think it's actually up to 8 or 9 now, but
Mm.
there was the first big national strike in the US of Amazon workers just over the Christmas holiday season, right at when it hurt the company the most. You had hundreds and thousands actually of workers participating in these actions all across the country in a show of strength. They know that they're not strong enough yet to force Amazon to the bargaining table, even though they won their union election. The management is still ignoring them and is still not sort of recognizing their union. But nevertheless, they are growing and they have a path towards victory, even if it takes a while.
What's to give us some good news before we get to the despair, but before we get to the empire, let's talk about some rebel victories. Your book mentions several cases of victories, right, or pathways to victory, using the Starbucks example. But let's just focus on Amazon because it's just a little bit more current. What is something that they did, Eric, that you think can be replicated, that shows a path to other workers? Like, all right, this is a model. This is a model that can be replicated in addition to worker, but this is something that gets us to the goal.
Sure. So I would say two things. The first is the basic takeaway from Amazon or Starbucks or any of these drives really is that you don't need to wait for anybody else to start a union. In fact, any job can become a union job if you organize it, without exception. And actually, I would argue every job should become a union job because, union jobs are what turns this country around, what makes work life not horrible. So this is the first thing. They showed that you don't have to wait. You can take the initiative. Workers have the capacity to start this. And the basic thing that they did, and so I think this is what you're getting at, like what is the really basic thing that they did that anybody can do to start this going? They spoke with their coworkers. I mean,
All
in
right.
many ways, unionization is that simple. It's people taking the risk of talking to their coworkers about what their problems are, what their hopes are, and whether collective action could make a difference. And so that's what they did. At Amazon, they had a lot of sort of fun tactics that went along with it. They gave out free food, they
I
had
remember that.
music, things like that. But really, no matter where you're at, what unionization is above and beyond of anything else is having one-on-one conversations with their coworkers. And when you really have to listen, it's more listening than talking. When you hear, like, what are people worried about? What do they want to see? What is the changes at work that they'd like to see? And then you talk them through and say, well, how do you think that could happen? Have you asked your manager for a raise? Have you asked your manager to make, the workplace safer? A lot of them have and didn't get anywhere. And so then you pose the question, well, what if we were to, instead of individually go to the management, what if we were to collectively go to management and ask for a raise? And so that's essentially what the process of unionization looks like everywhere.
You mentioned also this communication and how social media and digital communication is a means of actually empowering workers. Oftentimes now we're looking at social media, it's like, all right, radicalization, disinformation. But how can workers, right? Because look, even if you're low income, middle class, everyone and their mother now, for better and for worse, has a smartphone, has access to X, Blue Sky, Facebook, Discord. How are they using social media to bypass, if you will, the watchmen, right? Those who are making sure that these workers stay in line and do their job and don't ask questions, the troublemakers are removed.
Yeah, it's an important question. Yeah, and I think that you're right that a lot of people now assume social media is sort of inherently going to favor the right wing. And I push back a little bit against this and say actually it's been central to this unionization uptick. And the reason for that is basic, which is that what social media does and sort of digital tools generally is they lower organizing costs. So instead of having to rent out a hall, if you can do a Zoom meeting, well, then
Mm.
workers can self-organize more easily than they would have in the past. If you can, send out a mass text instead of having to, get a bunch of money to print flyers, well, then you can start self-organizing without having to initially at least rely on unions. And so what social media does is it's put a lot more power in the hands of rank and file workers. And the reason that's important is that unions, why I think are essential and why we need their resources and support, are very risk averse. Right, this is a big problem. Unions are extremely risk averse. They're very conservative, and oftentimes weren't taking the initiative that workers took. So workers started the drives at Starbucks. They started the drives at Amazon. And so what you see then is these tools give workers the power to initiate these efforts. And eventually they got the support they needed. But it wouldn't have been possible without things going viral on social media. It wouldn't have been possible without these tools that allowed them to connect with their workers without having to have a lot of money. And honestly, also GoFundMe and these sort of crowdfunding things were also important. Chris Smalls, for instance, was able to organize basically as a full-time organizer because they were able to raise money off of viral TikTok videos and getting people to donate on GoFundMe. And so that type of thing just wouldn't have been possible in that pre-digital era.
And it's important because as we're in this current moment, we're recording this on the 9th. Um, people feel overwhelmed. The guests that I've been invited to talk about, right? We try to find some mustard seeds of hope, and it's going to get bad. It's going to get worse before it gets better, right? We mentioned the Broligarchy. I want to flip and look at some other characters, right? Let's look at the Empire, if you will. If the workers are Andor and Ewoks trying their best to live a life of dignity, talk to us about the mindset, the ideology, and the tactics of the Musks, the Bezos, the Sam Altmans, the Sachs, who see quite literally democracy as a threat to capitalism and who see workers, especially empowered workers, as a threat to their bottom line.
Yeah, I think there's a quote from Jeff Bezos from Amazon that says the single biggest threat to our business model are unions, right? So they're very
Mm.
aware of where the obstacle to just maximum profits lies, and that's with organized workers, because they know that workers have power when they organize collectively, and so that's why they do everything possible to crush unions. And so, yeah, for them, they see blood in the water now that their own buddy Trump is, back in office. And I think that we should, as you suggest, expect a lot of horrible stuff to come down the lines. They are going to try to roll back the union victories that have happened. They're going to try to privatize everything they can, what from the postal service to any other, to education.
Weather system.
Right. So for them, they see this as this golden opportunity. The the reality is that they've already been in control. This isn't new, right?
Mm.
It didn't start with Trump. The influence of billionaires on both parties has been ongoing for a very long time, but they're going to accelerate for sure under Trump because Trump is, full throttle with them, whereas the Democrats, for all their contradictions, put up some support for unions and put up a little bit of resistance at times. So it's going to be hard times, but we also know that oftentimes in the union movement, we say the boss is the best organizer, which is to say sometimes what the bosses do against us is the thing that galvanizes people to fight back. And I think we can expect a lot of that over the coming months.
Yeah, I mean the good news is that they are so naked and shameless in their villainy, in their greed, and their corruption, right? The analogy I keep using is the wizard no longer hides behind the curtain. Their hands are fully in the cookie jars, and unlike Marie Antoinette, they're not even going to give us cake. They're taking everything. I was mentioning this right before we started recording. This type of widespread support, it seems, for Luigi Mangione, right, and his murder of the United Healthcare CEO. This has shaken up so many rich people in this country. Like, wait a second, how dare you celebrate or condone or rationalize this murder? And people don't care. They literally give zero Fs. They're out there on TikTok and on Facebook, on Instagram with their own profiles saying, hey, Luigi, if you need money, I'm here. And it shows type of a radicalization of where the majority seems to be saying and signaling to those in power, the system is not helping us. You are oppressing us. You are killing us, right? And you talk about youth radicalization, not necessarily in a way that supports violence, but you're talking about how young people are becoming radicalized in real time. They're saying that this system is not for me, and I'm going to reject the system. You keep telling me to love democracy and capitalism. What has it done for me lately? Talk to us about this, the radicalization of the youth, or the youth radicalization that you mentioned in your book.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece, and it confirms what you're saying, which is that in many ways, even though Trump is claiming to have a mandate and
There's no mandate. He only won
right,
by 1.4 percentage points. It's BS.
of course, right. And if anything, even some of the votes that he got were really because he demagogically framed himself as being anti-systemic, and people are against the system, right, and against the status quo. And so, actually, you're exactly right that there is a sort of broad disenchantment with the existing state of affairs. And what we've seen in the labor movement in particular is that young people have been at the fore. So I did a large
Yeah.
scale survey I reached out to every drive that unionized in 2022, and it turns out 80% of the worker leaders were 35 years or younger. So we see it's really Gen Z and Zoomers in particular that have taken the lead, and it's not surprising why. These are folks who have been the most shut out of the system. Post the Great Recession, indebted, facing the looming climate disaster. All of this stuff just makes it self-evident almost to younger generations that the system is not working.
Mm.
And they've also, they've seen actions at large scale. People feel very hopeless right now, but we've actually seen some really large mass collective action in recent years that have inspired these younger generations who are not unionizing. So whether it was the Black Lives Matters protests or Bernie Sanders to presidential runs, there's these examples that people have seen of large numbers of people coming together and obviously didn't win everything they wanted, but made enough of a difference, changed the conversation, won some concessions that people understand the power of collective action. And many of them understand it. In particular, though, the labor movement seems like a more viable path to put a lot of these issues into practice, right? People see the problems, and a lot of the youth who are turning to unionization are saying, well, we know climate change is an issue. We know the billionaires are in control. How do we actually change that? And the conclusion they came to based on their own experience is that, well, it has to start at work, because it's at work where if we do not go to work, Amazon cannot function. If we do not go to work, Starbucks cannot function. So we have a power there that we don't have in any other part of society. So I think that that's going to likely continue. It might get some, big blows against it under Trump, but youth aren't going away. Their sort of disenchantment with the system isn't going to go away, and so that's going to bubble up in one form or another.
Before we talk about the sheer naked attack of Republicans on unions and labor, Democrats, are Democrats doing enough? And if not, what do they need to do? Because I believe they, based upon what we mentioned, the Broligarchy being so naked and shameless, you've heard some Democratic officials say, listen, it's money in politics, right? That's the reality. And even if we want to talk about the billionaire class and the 1%, they give me donations.
Yeah.
And this is how we win elections. And I believe that they are not doing enough to meet the moment and meet their base. But your take.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I will say that one of the sort of best things about the Biden administration, for all its many, many problems, was it did have a good union policy. It
Right.
appointed a good head of the National Labor Relations Board, and that did make a significant difference. So, it's a little bit tricky because on the specific piece of boosting unionization, the last administration, more so actually than most Democratic administrations for the last 50 years, was quite good. In part, that was the pressure of the Bernie movement forced them to sort of tack to the left in a way that Harris didn't even seem like she was willing to tack to. So there was some good things that happened from the Biden administration, in large part under pressure. But the big story is that, since the 80s, and particularly since NAFTA and neoliberalism in the 90s, the Democrats have been just as complicit as the Republicans in all of the trade policies and sort
Mm.
of pro-rich policies that have decimated working class communities of all, backgrounds all across the country. And people know that. People know that from experience. And they don't see the Democrats as fighting for them. And so it's not that surprising that if Trump demagogically says he hears them and understands their pain, some of them are going to be voting for him. There's maybe some racism and sexism in there, but I think the overarching reason why so many working class people are either not voting or voted for Republicans or voted holding their nose for the Democrats is that they don't feel like the Democrats are fighting for them. And so, yeah, I think that the union movement has a responsibility actually because I don't see the Democratic Party establishment on its own adopting like a pro-worker populist program. It's just they're so deeply embedded in this very narrow professional world that is dominated by sort of subservience to big moneyed interests. I don't think, sort of for basic reasons, these people have been doing this for decades. They're not going to all of a sudden become Bernie type politicians.
They're not
So I
built
think
that way.
they're not built. I don't think they're capable of doing it. And if they were to do that, it would mean that everything that they've done for all these years is wrong, right? I think because they've been doing everything possible to fight against that wing of the Democratic Party. So I think it's going to be a real fight. And I think the labor movement has to understand that it's a fight, that it's you're not going to convince them to do the right thing. You actually have to out-organize them. So part of that is through keeping up the fights around unionization, keeping unionization sort of a hot topic like it's been the last 4 years, but then also supporting, the left-wing insurgents within the Democratic Party who are willing to fight. People like Bernie, people like the Squad, people who are fighting for a real economic populist program, but then also running union members for office, right?
Right,
Who are
right.
running, who say like, I unionized my shop, I went on strike, I represent working class people of all backgrounds, vote for me. And I think that that actually is a much more promising avenue because frankly, the Democratic brand is very tainted right now. And so kind of a union uh brand, if you, for lack of a better term, but like a union politics and a union rootedness and a working class ethos and like real experience, I think is going to resonate much more widely. We've barely seen anybody even try it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a winning strategy, especially as the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer, and it'll be more naked and shameless. And it's all about storytelling. And you have the perfect villain in Elon Musk, literally right there. It's just which Democrat will take the mantle of that story and really fight. I think it'll be a winning strategy. I want to ask this final question because it isn't really both sides. Because at least with Democrats, you have a chance, you have an opening. Ronald Reagan. Uh, was committed to destroying unions, to destroying workers, right? If you look at the trend and the charts, US, and I want to ask you this question because there's so many myths out there that American workers are lazy. Vivek Ramaswamy said that recently. Elon Musk said that. But can you tell us about the reality? Because I've been trying to write some articles there showing people that actually US worker productivity has gone up, profits have gone up, nothing's trickled down. Wages have become stagnant. We work more than European workers. We die now. Our life expectancy has gone down. We have less of a social safety net. We work more longer hours than even Japanese workers, right? Can you just talk to us about the American worker right now? Like, what's the reality for the American worker, especially in the past 40 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a story of stagnation at best and decline at worst, right? All of the things you describe are entirely right. And it's really, mind-boggling when you take a step back because this is happening in the richest country on earth. If there was
Mm,
one country where you don't need to see this, it should be the United States, right? The United States is the one country in particular because it's tremendous amount of wealth that could not only sort of equal the level of standards that we see in Europe and in Japan, things like that, but significantly surpass them. The money is there, right? And so it's just actually truly like a moral abomination that there's so much poverty, that there's so much needless suffering, that there's so much exploitation in this country when there simultaneously is so much wealth and resources. And people just see that. I think that your average working person, for all of the different misinformations out there, and people have all sorts of crazy ideas. I mean, it's not like everybody's like crystal clear on what are the causes of all this, but there's a deep, deep anger at the people at top. All the polls show this. It's actually, she comes up in the polls. People do not trust big business. People do not trust the billionaires. People are angry at them. And they understand that their lives could be better and that a big reason why they're not better is because small groups of people at the top are making decisions against their interests. They're not always clear about who exactly it is. A lot of people don't think anything can be done about that. This with the problem of sort of what people call apathy, but maybe just better considered resignation is a real one. But the reality is people's experience shows them day in and day out that they don't really have a voice, right? They
mm.
don't really have a voice at work. They don't really have a voice in politics. No matter who they vote for, it seems like the same type of policies get implemented. And so that leads towards a type of disenchantment. It leads towards looking for sometimes scapegoats. It looks towards sometimes looking towards demagogues. But that anger is there, and Trump's not going to be able to address that. Trump's going to exacerbate the exact
That's
problems
right.
that created that anger. So that anger is not going to go away.
And
And
he's not going to
until
help the workers at all.
at all. He's going to the contrary, he's going to be decimating unions and trying to go after them. So I think you're right that the Democrats in power, to me, it's a question of, what is the terrain through which we can organize more effectively? To me, that's the promise of having Democrats in power. It's not that you can expect them to do the right thing, but you have some possibility of
Right.
organizing to force them to do the right thing. Under Trump, it's much harder. You can still win, but the reality is it's going to be a lot more defensive battles. It's going to be preventing the worst things from happening. On the Democrats, there's more of a possibility for dramatic advances, not because they want to, but because their coalition can force them to go in the right direction.
The book is We Are the Union, How Worker to Worker Organizing is Revitalizing Labor and Winning Big. The author is Eric Blanc, who is Associate Professor of Labor Studies at Rutgers University, author of several books. The book is dropping in February. It gives us hope, and not just gives us hope, it gives us a roadmap to success, actual tangible examples and tactics that have proven to work at Starbucks, at Amazon. And folks, as a recurring theme of a lot of the conversations I've been having ever since Trump has won again by a small plurality, that the Avengers aren't coming to save us, right? Everyone has a role to play. Not everyone can be Luke Skywalker or Chewbacca, Ewoks, Andor, everyone, and Eric's book shows you how young workers, low income, middle class folks didn't have graduate studies, didn't go to college. They woke up one day and they're like, enough. And they took on titans, and they're winning small battles and victories. If you just get enough of us banding together, the Broligarchy can possibly be defeated. Eric, please shamelessly promote yourself.
Okay, thanks. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. This was a really great discussion. And I agree exactly with your analysis and sort of optimism despite everything. I think that's important. People shouldn't give up. Yeah, so check out the book. You can order it online. Just go, we Are the Union, look up my name, Eric Blanc. You can follow me, my Substack, Labor Politics. That's a good way to read my research. And then the last thing I would say is for any of you who are interested in organizing, if any of you are like, oh yeah, this sounds good, reach out. There's two resources I'd suggest. One is EWOC, actually, EWOC, the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, which supports any worker in the country who wants to unionize their workplace.
We did not do pre-notes, so that was just perfect
Yeah.
Jedi mind meld right there.
Exactly. And so you can go, that website is workerorganizing.org. You just fill out a form and an organizer will reach back out to you to support you in helping organize your workplace. And the other is you can consider salting, which is where you get a job at Starbucks or Amazon. We help you get a job so you can participate in a very strategic union drive. And for that, just reach out to me over social media. You can find my email easily online. Shoot me an email and I'll connect you with the union and the organizers.
That's awesome. Now we'll link to your Substack and the book. Again, the book is We Are the Union. It's coming out in February. The author is Eric Blanc. Thank you all for watching another episode of Chai Talk. As always, stay safe, stay hopeful, do the work. Take care.